Hey there, whiskey lovers. Welcome to another episode of Whiskey with Isla. And today I decided it was about time that we do something that's been very requested, namely an episode about whiskey that's a little more accessible than some of the more obscure choices that I have on my shelf. So what I have for you today is a list of 5 incredible whiskeys under $100 Canadian, and that is $75 USD and 65 euro for those of you watching somewhere other than the frozen north. So what I have here today is kind of a pretty broad selection. I wanted to make sure that I was giving you guys enough choice that something in here would pique your interest. We're going to kind of move along the line in an order that I'm going to go ahead and call what I feel like drinking today. And joining us today might be Yuri, my cat. He's been very interested this afternoon, and I think he's probably going to jump up here. So please forgive me if there is a giant gray fluff running around in the background. So without further ado, let's get started diving into our first amazing whiskey under 100 Canadian. And, oh, hello Yuri. Hey bud. So we are going to start with Auchentoshan 3-Wood, which is this guy here. So Auchentoshan 3-Wood is a really interesting whiskey, and from a really interesting distillery because it's one of the few distilleries in Scotland that triple distills. This is a process that you're more likely to find in Irish whiskey, and in Scotland it's just Auchentoshan and Hazelburn, which is actually a line of Springbank, which we're going to talk about later, whiskies. So with the Auchentoshan, bring the bottle out for you here. It is their 3 wood number. They do have a few other intro level priced whiskeys available, but I find this one is the one where you're getting the most flavor bang for your buck. And that's mainly because this spends 10 years first in a bourbon barrel, and then they move it to an Oloroso barrel for another year and finish it in a PX sherry cask. Now, if you know anything about sherry, you know that PX is going to impart an incredible level of sweetness and depth of flavor. So that means that this little number here is going to have just a huge amount of sherry notes going on, and we can kind of guess that just from the color. So it's bottled at, let's see, it's bottled at 43%, which is, for the Americans watching, 86 proof, and you'll note it's a gorgeous color. It's a rich, deep, almost mahogany, and that's really going to be from the amount of time that it's spent in some sherry. So let's give it a nose, because we do have a lot of whiskey to get through. And man, that is a sherry nose if I've ever smelled one. We are getting nuts. We are getting dried fruit. We are getting that sweetness that even on the nose just spreads out across your tongue. This smells unctuous. It smells sticky and delicious. Let's give it a taste. So the first thing I want to comment on is the mouthfeel. It is luxurious, it's heavy, it's sinking into my tongue, it's doing things that I honestly don't often find in a whiskey at this price point. It's also remarkably smooth, considering, again, it's a younger whiskey that is, again, priced in a range where you often expect to find things be a little sharp, be a little hot. We're tasting, as it's settling in there, balsamic vinegar reduction. Oh, hey, bud. We're tasting a balsamic vinegar reduction. We're tasting chocolate notes, but not like a milky chocolate. This is more of a rich, dark chocolate, something that you would pick up at a specialty store. And then those stewed fruits and that hazelnut flavor is coming through in this really gorgeous way. It's just saturating my palate almost. If I had to liken drinking this to anything, oh god, it would be like biting into a really luxurious pecan pie at the same time as you are sipping some almost mulled wine. There's spices, there's fruits, and there's nuts. It is absolutely exceptional. The finish on this is long, it's plummy, it's Christmassy, and it's pure sherry, which again, remarkable considering our price point. So that's our Auchentoshan covered, but we're gonna move on to another sherry bomb because we are moving on to Glenfarclas. So the Glenfarclas 12. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I'm a big fan of Glenfarclas because it is my go-to whenever anybody says, I love Macallan, please give me some Macallan, and I say no because I won't pay Macallan prices. Glenfarclas is one of those Speysiders out there that is going to be the best bang for your buck if you're looking for that classic Speyside approach to sherry. You'll notice actually sitting behind me here, I have the 25. And this is one that I am nearly out of. And for good reason. It is a lovely whiskey and it is super competitively priced for both a 25-year-old and a heavily sherried whiskey. Their 12 is similarly competitively priced. It is a gorgeous, heavily sherried whiskey that is everything that I would be looking for from a Macallan at a price that's much more tolerable. So this bad boy weighs in at 43%, so not too hot. And for the Americans, again, that's 86 proof. And let's give this one a nose, shall we? So we're getting a ton of caramel off the bat. It's not quite smacking me in the face with the same kind of sherry that the Auchentoshan 3 would. This is a very different smelling sherry to me. It's got sort of a brightness to it. It's less of that sticky unctuousness and it's more bright and lively fruits. I think there's some spices in there too that I'm smelling. Let's give this a taste. Right off the bat, again, a very different approach to sherry than our Auchentoshan 3 would. It's much lighter, sort of dances across your tongue. It's very easy to swallow, dangerously easy to swallow. I'm getting some honey notes. There's a grassy level to it that's really interesting, and I kind of wonder if that comes from its place in the closer into the highlands, and that's sort of tempering the sweetness and the richness of the sherry, and it's sort of falling away into the flavor of the skins of hazelnuts, not the actual nut themselves. It doesn't have that creaminess. It has that sort of nutty, bitter, but in a good way flavor that the sheath of a hazelnut has once you bite into it. It's a little drying, and as it's sitting here, again, just feeling how this is sitting in my mouth, wildly different than the Auchentoshan. It is comparatively incredibly drying. My palate is just zipped up. I'm getting some fruit and I'm getting some spice. It's very tasty. It's very straightforward, and that's one of the things to really like about a Glenfarclas whiskey is that you know what you're getting. It's exactly what it says on the tin. It is a straightforward, easy drinking, tasty, sherried whiskey, and under $100. I mean, can't complain. Moving on to our next whiskey. We are going to stay technically in the Speyside region, but here's the fun part. It is more of a Highland style malt, and it's marketed as such. So this is AnCnoc 12. It is bottled at 40%, which is our 80 proof mark for the Americans. And this is marketed as a Highland whiskey, even though it technically falls within the Speyside region. And that's because it's about as east as you can go while still being a Speysider, and also because stylistically it is far more in line with those Highland style malts of grass and honey than it is with your more classic sherried style Speysides. Let's give this one a note. Now this is one of the ones that I often reach for when someone comes to me and says, Isla, I don't like whiskey. I'm like, okay, let's run you through a few options. I reach for AnCnoc because I find in a lot of ways AnCnoc doesn't really taste like that intense whiskey flavor that you expect. I get a lot of lightness and fruit and grass and things that make it very palatable if you're new to the whiskey world. Let's give it a nose. So right off the bat, I get butterscotch, I get apples and pears, really quite intense on the pear, and honeysuckle notes. Very strong honeysuckle notes. It's like you're burying your nose in the flower. Another super easy drinking one. This one basically, to me, goes down like water, which is pretty remarkable. It is lightly fruity, lightly malty, lightly grassy. There's a tropical dimension there, maybe some kind of cooked pineapple. But the main takeaway from this is freshness. This tastes like biting into a juicy pear while sitting on a fresh cut lawn. It is just easy drinking. It's one of my go-to summer drams for that reason, and you know, the finish is just fading away into this delicate flavor of pears and caramel. Gorgeous stuff. And again, under 100 Canadian. So we're gonna move on to our fourth whiskey, which is my Campbelltown pick. Now I am really into Campbelltown as a region, mainly because Campbelltown has this really cool funk to it that I really enjoy. It used to be actually the largest, or one of the largest whiskey producing regions in the world. It was the Whiskey City, but unfortunately due to a series of factors, the enormous number of distilleries in the region closed and they are down to 3. So Springbank is one of the lucky few that have survived the downturn, and they are one of those ones that really, in my mind, captures that Campbelltown funk, that sort of straddling the flavor profiles of a mainland whiskey and an island whiskey. So we're gonna give this a nose. And on the nose right away, I mean, we're moving into something that's a little earthier, a little more vegetal, a wisp of smoke, nothing crazy, but it's there, wisp of peat. And then buried inside of that is freshness, apples, pears, grass. But for me, the big thing here is, again, that funky vegetable flavor. Almost reminds me of really good brie, which I know sounds horrifying and something you're going to drink, but trust me. Let's give it a taste. It's very slippery. It coats your tongue, but not in the thick way that the Auchentoshan 3 wood does. This is like slipping and sliding into every little nook and cranny. It's very vegetal. Wisp of smoke still clinging, almost a charcoal note to it. It's fading away into this beautiful salt note that's beginning to appear on the back of my palate. And again, underneath it all is delicate fruits, an ashy quality to it, like when you deliberately set a marshmallow on fire and then you eat only the burned bit. It's a very complex flavor profile and something that I find really engaging. It lingers. There's a resinous quality to it that just sticks around in your mouth, and it really blossoms along with that salt. This is one of my favorites to reach for when I'm looking for something a little different, when I don't want something that's going to be just sweet and easy and approachable. I want a challenging whiskey. This is one that I reach for because I love sitting there and unpacking all of the flavors. Now, speaking of challenging whiskeys, this one is going to be, for many of you guys, a little more on the challenging side because we're getting into my Isla whiskey pick. Now, I figured we would end with Isla because, well, after all, I am Isla. but also because that was my first love. I fell in love with whiskey through Isla Whiskies, and Laphroaig in particular. I've actually even visited Isla, and the Laphroaig tour was one of my absolute favorites, and it culminated in me getting to do a photo shoot in the distillery, which was pretty remarkable. I don't know if I'll ever get to experience anything as cool in a distillery as that. But enough waxing poetic about how amazing the distillery is. If you can get there, do so. Let me talk about how amazing their whiskey is. So there's 3 entry-level Laphroaig whiskies to choose from, and this is my pick between them, as I find it has a little bit more of a developed character that I gravitate towards. Don't get me wrong, the Select and the Laphroaig 10 are fantastic choices, and again, under 100 Canadian. But for me, the Quarter Cask is the one that really brings it home. So it starts its life in bourbon casks, and then it moves into something called a Quarter Cask. Now, Quarter Cask is exactly as it sounds. It is a quarter of the size. It is a tiny little cask. And the beauty of that is that you're taking a large volume of whiskey, sloshing around these massive barrels, and putting them into much smaller barrels. Now what that's doing is it's giving a smaller volume of whiskey more contact with the barrel. So you start it for 5 to 6 years in a very large barrel, but then by finishing for a couple of months in these smaller barrels, you really bring out the character of the barrel effectively. So the beauty of the Quarter Cask is that in my mind, you're really tasting what the whiskey's been living in for those few months, which is very exciting to me. Because left to my own devices, I would probably chew on a barrel stave. Let's give it a nose. So here's why I said it was going to be a challenging whiskey. Again, you've got that classic Isla style. We've got medicinal notes. We've got tar. We've got rope. We've got salt. We've got, oh god, the peat on this baby. And for 48%, which is, you know, I believe the strongest or the highest ABV of all of these, I'm not getting much alcohol in the nose. Now granted, I've had this bottle for a while. It could have all faded away, but it's one of the things that I like about this whiskey generally is that with a Quarter Cask you don't get punched in the face with the alcohol nose. And hiding underneath there's a salted caramel flavor and a little wisp of spiciness that I think is probably what the cask, what that Quarter Cask is imparting, that spice that comes from the oak. Let's give it a taste. Ooh, again, that smoke, that salt, that tarriness, that peat, with the spice here, the flavor of delicious spicy woodiness joining everything else is like this cornucopia of maritime flavors that is just delightful. It's sinking into my palate right now, and the sides of my mouth are just lighting up with salt. It reminds me, flavor-wise, like, God, licking the deck of a ship, but in a good way. I don't know how else to say that. It's woody, it's tangy, there's a sweetness there, there's some spice, and there's that incredible smoke, that incredible tarry, peaty flavor. I could drink this all day. I probably shouldn't though. The finish is very long. It wafts away like ships in the night. This is, of all of my Laphroaigs, and I don't know if you can see, I have many, including 2 hand fills from the distillery. This is one that I reach for shockingly often, considering, again, that price point. And on that note, this has been 5 whiskeys, under $100. Every one of them an incredible bang for your buck. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to pick these up and immediately love them. What I am saying is that if you're looking to get into whiskey and aren't prepared to drop hundreds of dollars on your first bottle but don't know where to start, any one of these is going to be a great choice as your first whiskey bottle. Whether you think you're going to like the sweet or the ultra savory, doesn't matter. all are going to be a fantastic choice, and all are going to be easy to find and a little easier on your wallet. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.